Okay, tonight is Genesis chapter 39.
And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand.
Okay, now we're going to pick up with the story of Joseph again in this chapter. It began in chapter 37, and then chapter 38 goes and tells a story of Judah. But now chapter 39, now we're back to Joseph again. So we're picking up where chapter 37 left off, where, as you may recall, he was sold into slavery, and he was purchased by a man named Potiphar, who was the chief of the guards at the palace. And so now we're going to see what happens to Joseph in the house of Potiphar. Right, and as chapter 39 begins, again reiterates, Joseph was brought to Egypt. Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, bought him. So now he's a servant in his house. It says, all right, but in verse 2 and 3, right, it shows the attitude of Joseph, that he could have been very well feeling, forgotten by God even, all right, obviously betrayed by his brothers, and then, it could have been, oh, woe is me, my life is over, and I'm just going to be miserable and mean and unhappy for the rest of my life. Right? That would have been one way of doing it. But instead, it says in verse 2, it says, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, right, in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Right? In other words, he decided he was going to be the best servant that he could be. Even though he didn't choose to be here, he was taken forcibly, his own brothers betrayed him, so like I said, he could have been just bemoaning that and been upset about that and angry about that for his whole life, but instead he said, you know what, I'm here, I'm going to do the best that I can do with this. And even to the point where it says his master Potiphar noticed, right, it said in verse 3, it says he saw the Lord was with him, and then basically everything he touched went well. And what better thing can be said about somebody that everything you touch works out good? And why? It says in verse 2, because the Lord was with him. So recognizing that even in this circumstance, the Lord was still with him, and so he did the best he could. Everything that he did turned out good, and even his master noticed, say, hey, this guy's different, all right? I got lots of servants, but nobody like him. Everything he touches, it turns out well.
And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass, from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person, and well favored.
So as a result of Potiphar noticing this, Joseph was different, so he gave him responsibility. All right, it says in verse 4, it says he found grace in his sight. He made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. He said, you know what? You're in charge of everything. You're in charge of the other servants. You're in charge of running the household. You're in charge of making sure everything gets done that needs to get done. So he turned it all over to him. Nice to have somebody to be able to give that to. This way he didn't have to worry about it, Potiphar. He could just do his job as captain of the guard and just enjoy life, and he didn't have to worry about all the details of the household. He had Joseph there to take care of it. So it says that from the time that happened in verse 5, he says that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. When I see something like this, I refer to this, and mentions this phrase in the New Testament, as a righteous man's reward. Now, what a righteous man's reward is, and you may recall when Jesus sent out the 12 and then the 70, that he said, and anybody who receives you in their house will receive a righteous man's reward. And what that means is that God will bless, in this case, a household or a wider group of people for the sake of the righteous man who's there in that household. Okay, so as you see in verse 5, it says, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. Right? It wasn't that necessarily God was blessing them for their own sake because they had done anything worthy of being blessed, but for Joseph's sake, the whole household was blessed. And you can think of examples, of that, right? That for example, let's say in this area, my children went to school in this area, the different schools, and I would hear reports across the nation of people coming into school with guns and so forth. So daily, I would pray for the schools that they would be kept safe from any intruders. Okay, this way my children would be safe, right? But in so praying, and thank God, by the way, the prayer was answered, the schools were protected. But as a result of that prayer, everybody's children were protected. So even people who may not even believe in God, they sent their children to that school, and God protected the school as a result of, not just my prayer, but anybody who was praying on behalf of the school, right? That God protected that school and all the children therein. So there were families that received what I would call the righteous man's reward, just because their children were in the same place as my children or others who were praying for that school, right? Or similar, you go on an airplane, right, and you pray for a safe flight. And if you believe, that God protects that plane and delivers you safely in the destination city, well, guess what? Everybody on the plane got protected too, because God protected the plane as a result of your prayer and perhaps others, and even those who may not believe in God, they got a free ride. They got there safely because God protected the plane. So that is a righteous man's reward, is being in a certain proximity with a righteous man that sometimes will allow you to receive blessings of God, not because of you, but because of the righteous man that's with you. So in verse 6 now, it just continues on saying, Potiphar, put everything in Joseph's hand, to the point where Potiphar didn't even know anymore what I have in the house, because Joseph just in charge of everything. He's going to go to the stores, and he's going to go buy things. He's going to stock the house. He's going to stock the kitchen. Whatever had to be done, cleaning materials, whatever had to be done, Joseph took care of it all. That's why he says he knew not aught or anything he had. He didn't know anything that was there. All right. The only thing he knew is to save the bread which he did eat. So I guess he knew what was there to eat. So he was able to eat on his own, Potiphar. But other than that, Joseph managed everything. So he turned it all over to him, trusted him completely, said, it's all in your hands. I know you're going to do a good job. I see how the Lord is blessing you. I see how the household is prospering because of you. So everything in the household is in your hands.
And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?
So, of course, everything can't keep going this smoothly forever. So, as it says in verse 7, it says the Potiphar's wife notices Joseph also. Okay, Potiphar noticed him for the good worker he was, but his wife noticed him and I guess had some attraction to him. That sure. I mean, a guy who seems that everything he touches goes well. I'm sure he was therefore confident because of the Lord. So his wife found him attractive and invited him into her bedroom, right, to lie with her, as it says, right? But he refused. The temptation was put right there. She's trying to seduce him, but he said, I can't do this. Right, and and he answers in a good way, right? He doesn't say, well, I don't find you attractive, or would want to be with you, right? No, he didn't say that, but he says in 8, he says, come on now, he says, my master Potiphar has trusted me with everything in the house, right? He's put a lot of trust in me, and in verse 9 he says, there's none greater in this house than I. I'm the senior person. He says, and he hasn't held back anything but me, except for you, his wife. So imagine being that way. I don't know if it was actually said that way, but it would be maybe a little humorous if it was. Potiphar saying, anything in the house is yours. Feel free to do anything. Use anything you want, except my wife. Don't go using her. All right. But whether he said it or not, clearly that was beyond what he should have been doing. It would be a betrayal to him, but also, of course, a betrayal to God. That, I mean, God has certain expectations of us as people of God, so it would be a sinful thing, and so it would be even risking the Lord's blessing, that might no longer be upon him, right? But also, it says it would be a betrayal of his master. That's why he says he's trusted me with everything. So how am I going to do this great wickedness and sin against God?
And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out.
So maybe that answer worked, for the first time or the first few times, but this woman was apparently persistent. All right, she really wanted him. So in 10 it says, it came to pass, she spake to Joseph day by day. So every day that he's there doing his work, and she's maybe hanging around and trying to spend time with him and trying to get him into her bedroom. All right, so he says, but he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't listen. He says, she wanted him to come in to her and so forth, and he wouldn't. Right. So it says finally in verse 11, it says this one day Joseph went into the house to do his work, and it turns out there was nobody else in the house except the wife. Right. So again, the worst situation you want to be in, right? Because now there's not even any witnesses as to what's going to happen, and what happened is what you would expect could happen, and that's why you always want to have witnesses around when you're in this kind of a situation, right? And it says in 12, she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me, and he wouldn't, so he says he ran away, but to get away, I guess she had a hold of his garment, so she hung on to it, and so he just let it go, all right? Whatever garment it was, he stepped out of it, let it go, and ran away, and left her holding this garment in her bedroom. Uh-oh.
And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled, and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his lord came home.
And sure enough, the wife is now, I'm sure she's angry, she's humiliated, that he would rather run away than sleep with her. So now she's had enough, right? Now she's going to strike back. So it says when he left, now she's holding the garment. So she calls the other men in the house and basically says, Hey, look what happened. See, my husband had to buy this Hebrew servant and bring him into the house, and now look what he did. He came in here, he tried to force himself upon me, and I tried to cry out, and I grabbed his garment to try to hold on to him, so he ran away, and look, see, here's the proof. Here's his garment right here with me in my bedroom that proves what I'm saying is true. He tried to attack me, tried to rape me, and that's what happens when you bring a Hebrew into the house, right? So she's making this full lying accusation to strike back at Joseph because she's angry that he wouldn't follow through with what she wanted him to do.
And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison.
And Potiphar comes home, and she's ready to confront him and tell him her version of what happened. And says, Hey, the Hebrew that you brought into the house, right? He came in and tried to force himself on me in my bedroom. Look, I grabbed his garment. Here it is, right? And she shows him. And so in 19 it says, when the master heard the words of his wife saying that, it says his wrath was kindled, right? He became angry. It says, and Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. Okay, so he basically had Joseph removed from the house, put into prison as a result of trying to rape his wife, or so he thought, and so he went ahead. He believed what the wife had told him. Now, I've read in some cases or some writings that perhaps Potiphar wasn't completely 100% convinced, because I guess he could have had Joseph put to death for this if he was totally convinced. Instead, he had him put in this prison, right, where he would spend time for the next several years, right? But and who knows? Maybe Potiphar knew his wife. Maybe he knew she was a little seductive or whatever. So now he's not going to tell his wife, "No, you're a liar." But it's been said that that perhaps he didn't go as far as he could have gone because of he also thought he knew Joseph for however long he'd been in the house. He trusted him with everything. So to come home today and this what this guy who I trusted so completely is going after my wife. It may have been a little hard to believe, but still, I mean, it should be pointed out. The end of 19 does say his wrath was kindled, so he was definitely angry and he knew he had to do something. So he had Joseph sent to prison.
But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper.
Now what happens as the chapter ends, it's almost poetic in its way, that it's the same way the chapter began. At the beginning of the chapter, it said that Joseph began as a servant in Potiphar's house, and instead of bemoaning his fate, he just became the best servant that he could be. Well, now in 21 to 23, now he's a prisoner, and not that he didn't do anything wrong, so he's there with no justification. It says that again, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Again, he became now the best prisoner he could be. Not that he wanted to be a prisoner any more than he wanted to be a servant, but just like he was the best servant he could be, now he becomes the best prisoner he could be. So again, the most positive outlook you could imagine, right, as opposed to being negative about the whole thing, which he could easily have been. Because all these things happened to him not through his own fault. Certainly here, he did nothing wrong, and yet now he's in prison, right? So in 22, same kind of thing. So the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. He put him in charge of the prisoners. Whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. Okay, he says the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. All right, so almost exactly the same is that what Joseph did prospered because the Lord was with him, and because again he didn't allow himself to get too down, as much as he might have been upset about where he was. But yet now he's going to be the best prisoner he could be. The keeper of the prison noticed it. He put him in charge of the other prisoners, taking care of the different things. And then whatever he gave him to do, didn't have to even double check it. He knew if Joseph said it's going to get done, it's going to get done. So this was the kind of individual Joseph was. In spite of all these different bad things happening to him, right, being sold into slavery, now being put in prison, yet he continues to trust in God. He was the best servant he could be. Now he's the best prisoner he could be. And people notice that. They notice when you're positive and doing the best that you can. And it was mainly that the Lord was with him. And so in this case, the keeper of the prison noticed it and even gave him that kind of responsibility. So Joseph was a positive influence and prospered wherever he was and whatever his circumstances were.